Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcus Grimm with Benchmark Construction. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's, what we hope will be an exciting program, Nurse Call System Replacement, Planning Today for Tomorrow's Healthcare. I am joined today by a variety of great speakers who know all about nurse call replacement. So we are thrilled to have you all on the program today. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. Questions that we always get asked on these particular webinars are, can I ask questions? Absolutely, you can ask questions. You're probably familiar with the GoToWebinar chat room window, but if you are not, you've got a window right there. Feel free to ask us any questions that you might have. In addition, there's always somebody who wants to know, can I get my hands on these slides? The answer is absolutely. We will make these slides available to you. And if technology is working well, and for those of us who work in technology, some days that's an if. But we do believe that we are recording today's program, and we will make it available to everyone who is on the call today. Wanted to let everyone know as we move forward into the slides here, today's program is really kind of interesting. We've got a nice cross-section of healthcare attendees, but we've got people from all facets of healthcare. So we have some people on the line who are in the hospital setting. We have some other people who are on the line from senior living as well, because let's face it, nurse call these days, there's as much of that going on in senior living as there is in the hospital environment. We've done our best to keep our language vertical neutral today, but if we do say hospital, it certainly could apply to you in senior living and vice versa as well. As we take a look at the agenda we'll be going through today, I want to introduce you to the entire team first on the next slide. We've got a lot of people here today. We have one person who we believe might have some technical difficulties, but hopefully he'll be available for us. But the rest of the team is here and ready to provide all of their insights. The second thing we're going to talk about is the state of the industry. Nurse calls, like everything else that's going on in healthcare today or technology today, in that, you know, where it was 10 years ago is very different from where it is today, and we've got a speaker who's going to speak specifically to that. Then when we really understand where is the industry today, well, we're going to take a look at the best practices for evaluation. So how do you even figure out, you know, what it is that you're looking for or might need in a nurse call station? After that, we're going to ask the question, do you need a contractor? Obviously, I'm here. I'm with Benchmark Construction. I'm going to be joined today by one of our project managers. Sometimes you wouldn't even need a general contractor when you're doing nurse call. Other times you would. So we'll talk about how you can kind of make that decision whether or not you need a general contractor involved. And then finally, at the end of the day, when you're getting ready to put together your RFP, what are some things to think about? Not surprisingly, most of us don't write nurse call system RFPs every day or every week. So if you actually want to address, you know, the RFP process, what are some things that you want to be thinking about? So at this point, I want to introduce you to the members of the panel today. That's me in the lower right there. On the upper left, that's Mark Lizambri. Mark, did I get that correct?
Yes, you did.
All right. Close enough, Mark says. Mark is going to take us through two pieces of the presentation today, state of the industry, and this is a guy who's been at the industry for, we were discussing this yesterday, Mark, 3 decades?
Just about.
Just about 3 decades in the industry. So Mark has all kinds of knowledge in terms of how we got where we are today. I've also got Herb Records with us. Herb is with Peak Outcomes Consulting Group. And Herb, how long you've been in healthcare?
About 15 years.
So Herb is bringing 15 years of experience to the table today. And he is really going to talk about, okay, what do these best practices look like when you're looking to do this? All right, I'm going to cross my fingers. Brian, are you on the phone? And my guess is right now Brian is talking to himself. Unfortunately, we can't hear him. So, but Brian is a member of the Peak Outcomes team. And Herb, I'm going to ask you at various points of the conversation today, what would Brian say or what would Brian do? Because Brian's a very special member of your team. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what Brian brings to your team, Herb?
Sure. So Brian is actually a nurse who came from the bedside from a local academic medical center. He was actually on the customer side of the table. He assisted that organization with selecting a nurse call and then designing their workflow and implementation. Loved it enough that he came to work for us. He still does practice at the bedside a couple of days per month. But his value is being able to see this from both sides and being able to see, or being able to say, as a nurse, this is how the system benefits me.
Terrific. So it's a shame we might miss out on Brian's insight today. Brian, you should have that chat window at the ready. Feel free to any insights you want to put in there. We will try to speak on your behalf, and I will ask Herb how he would respond for you. And finally, the last member of our team today is Roger Daub. So let's say you get involved with one of these projects, and construction might be something that you need to include in that. Roger's going to explain, okay, here's why construction matters, or here's why it doesn't matter. So, and the only final thing I guess we can mention off the slides here is it looks like Herb and Roger go to the same barber. So, there we go. But hey, let's get started with this program. We've got an hour outlined for this thing. I don't know if it's going to take us an hour. We'll probably take about 40 minutes on some presentation materials here. Feel free to ask questions at any point, and we'll figure out if we want to handle them at the end or how we want to do it. So I want to move on now. I want to welcome Mark to the stage. Mark has been at this, we talked about this, very nearly 3 decades. And so, the whole reason we actually decided to have this webinar was it was Healthcare Management Magazine came out with a survey last year, and they were asking people in the healthcare space, what's the #1 thing that you're thinking about doing over the next couple of years? Mark, was it any surprise to you that nurse call systems was actually #1 with 26% of the people saying, we're going to be looking at this in the next couple of years?
Not really, Marcus, because nurse call systems have typically been considered a commodity in this industry, like a public address system or a fire alarm system, but only recently in the last 10 years have people realized that this is a communication platform that can provide more than just a bell, a light, and a tone, and something more than being a DOH requirement. So what I'm talking about is it's more than a patient or a resident pushing a button for help and that ringing and making noise everywhere, and then a nurse or caregiver responding to that and simply being a duress or an emergency call system. What people are finding now with the advanced applications and integrations available to nurse call these days, it becomes a complete workflow platform that not only benefits patients and their primary caregivers, but the entire organization.
Excellent. Now, one of the things that you've talked to us about is a lot of these systems you're replacing are 15 to 20 years old, so they're already old to start with, but the industry has changed a lot to the point that sometimes is it almost like going to the museum when you pull out this old stuff? I mean, are you seeing logos and brands that don't exist anymore?
We are. Most nurse call systems are built to life safety grade compliance, so they do tend to last a long time. Some of the things we're pulling out were basic systems that had limited capabilities. And usually with some of the turnover in healthcare, when it comes to replacement, the folks that might have determined what to buy the first time around are no longer there, or the folks that have acquired this system or the responsibility for maintaining it sometimes don't know what else is out there and how much improvement can be achieved through a more advanced system that's out there.
So we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to be talking about more advanced systems. We're going to be talking about some cool features that weren't even on the radar 10, 15 years ago. But we also need to take a moment to address the fact that if you've got an old system and if there is a failure, what are the DOH implications of that?
Well, they can be significant because these significant outages are reportable, and without availability, sometimes the parts are obsolete, and it becomes an emergency situation, especially in the case of catastrophic failure. Nurse call systems take careful planning to design, and it's not something you want to have to do at a moment's notice.
Outstanding. Now, one of the things that you guys have talked to us about is the fact that when you go in to do a project like this, lots of times you might not be dealing with one system, but you're dealing with a hodgepodge. So let's talk about what you often see when you go into some of these older installations.
Yeah, some of the older installations that have a mixed blend of product throughout, they're really doing a disservice to the organization. It's difficult for maintenance staff to stock several different brands and types of stations and so forth. It's difficult for staff who may move between floors or units within the facility to recognize what the stations look like, what the buttons do, and how to activate those systems and be efficient in their daily work. So there's a lot of benefits to standardizing on one platform. Most nurse call systems today, even though they may be in disparate areas of care, are interconnected as a network and therefore provide enterprise-type features which include reporting, maintenance, one database to maintain. So there are a lot of benefits to standardizing on nurse call and using one platform across all your areas of care.
Herb, we talked a little bit about this in our rehearsal earlier this week where Brian was here. Let's just talk about that a little bit more about in Brian's world. You know, what does that look like if I've got a different system on the second floor than I do on the fifth floor? I mean, that's a reality there. Like, a nurse is not assigned to a given floor, right?
Correct. Yeah. So very commonly nursing, and this is true of both of acute care and of long-term care. Nursing staff can move back and forth between floors. We actually have an organization that we work with that asked us to help them call out all of the different possible outcomes for a particular type of emergency based on the fact that they had different hardware platforms, different technologies. It was inconsistent for staff. And the challenge for staff is, okay, when I have an emergency, can I get the resources I need? And do I need to stop and remember how to get those resources from this area compared to from that area? Kind of the other side of that same discussion, we've seen this from patients. It's a different system for patients to interact with. Occasionally, a patient will come into the hospital, end up in a nice fancy new unit with new technology, and then at some future visits end up in an older part of the building, older technology, different systems. And I've actually heard firsthand reports of patients complaining, saying, hey, I want to be in that newer area. I want that newer technology because I understand it. It's better for me.
So really, just to take a simple analogy from this, it's almost like we're saying, hey, on a given day you might use an iPhone, on another day you might use an Android. Oh, by the way, when you're going to use that phone, you're going to be in a moment of crisis.
Correct. Oh, and here's a flip phone too.
And here's the flip phone. Excellent. Herb, I'm going to keep you on the stage here for a minute. We'll bring Mark back in a little bit. He's going to tell us how to actually write these RFPs. But Herb, now we're getting into the nuts and the guts, the nuts and bolts and the guts of everything that you do. So how do I even evaluate? I mean, Mark already pointed this out to us. You probably haven't looked at nurse call in 15, 20 years. So take us through some of the best practices for evaluation.
Sure. So one of the big things that we love to share the idea of developing a shopping list. It oftentimes, since it's been a while since an organization has shopped for nurse call, you might not even know what all the options are or what all the features are out there. So you see one presentation and you see a lot of fun stuff. It can occasionally force an organization to step back and say, hey, let's look at the bigger picture. Let's figure out where I want to go. Again, considering that longer lifespan with the hardware, think of technology now, think of where technology might be 5 or 10 or 20 years down the road, and plan for a system that can grow from a technology standpoint, that can give you future capacity and future integrations.
I promised you guys yesterday I was going to ask you questions that prove I know nothing about nurse call. So here's one that I have for you, Herb, is let's talk about getting longevity out of these things. Do we see potential software upgrades? So for instance, if I bought a nurse call 20 years ago, I'm sure I could not change the capabilities of that. The systems that are out there today, do they have that capacity to grow as technology changes?
They absolutely do, and that growth capacity is typically on the software side. So parts and pieces may be attached to your building, but with software enhancements, it gives you more and more capability. It has the ability to improve workflow. It has the ability to improve staff-to-staff communication.
So let's talk a little bit now, and Mark mentioned this, the idea of, oh, by the way, nurse call today can do a lot more than just ring a bell. So you know, we've got this slide up here, integrated solutions. How is that different than ringing the bell, Herb?
So how that's different, the transition has been rather than just patient to nurse communication, there's more and more communication back and forth between staff members. There's more and more automation of workflow. Discussions with Brian, one of the big values that he saw in the system, having been through an implementation, is it buys the nurse more time with the patient or more time with the resident. It's less time looking, it's less time chasing resources or people or parts, and more time in patient care. One of the other big changes that has come along is regulatory oversight is much more complex and much more involved than it previously was in healthcare. And that's true not just of hospitals, but also of nursing communities, of skilled living communities. There are focuses on nurse-sensitive indicators. There are particular patient outcomes, and there's a lot of focus on improving those. So as you're looking at a nurse call system, it's important to consider not just patient-to-nurse communication, but what else can that help meet from a regulatory standpoint.
So we've got integrated solutions. This is kind of funny, but I mean, it's not surprising. We're in a data-driven world now, but I got to ask you a question. The systems that were out there 20 years ago, did they do any type of analytics whatsoever?
None.
Okay, so let's talk about what does data analytics look like in the nurse call world?
So commonly, we like to see systems that give you a big picture overview. What did my organization do last week, last month, last year? How can I correlate the data that I'm getting from my nurse call system to my patient experience or to my resident experience? A lot of the focus with HCAPS has become perception of patient response. And nurse call systems that have the ability to provide analytics can provide some very good predictors for where those HCAPS scores are going to come from. How is your patient to staff communication? There are also the ability with many of the more advanced systems to provide detail level reports. If we have a service complaint, if we have an event with a particular patient or resident, let's go back and look and see what happened leading up to that, and see if we have accountability with our staff, see if we're providing the appropriate service to our customers, and then use that as a learning opportunity for the future.
So it sounds like from an evaluation standpoint, the very first thing people need to do is realize that the nurse call today is definitely not the nurse call that they were replacing 2 decades ago. So let's move on a little bit and talk about some things outside of the features to look at and best practices for evaluation. What's the first one that we have here, Herb?
So one of the things we love to do is we love to take organizations on field trips. It's easy for the sales team to walk in and present you a lot of lovely solutions, but what we like is we like to put you in the room with other customers who have used the product, see how it works for them. We like to step back and say, okay, talk to nursing at this other hospital, talk to nursing at this other skilled nursing facility, see what their feedback is. And generally that is a much more positive approach, I think, than just sales.
Now, before we move on, Mark, you handle a lot of the sales. I do have a question for you. Is this the air-conditioned luxury tour bus that you take your customers to on field trips?
Just like that, but a little shorter.
That's a nice image, guys. I like it. Let's talk. Is there any technology that doesn't have a user community today, Herb? You know, how do these groups interact with one another?
Sure. So what we like to do is we hold local user groups. There are one or more national user groups that happen as well. But we like the idea of getting our customers together to share ideas, to talk about best practices, to trade those. Here's this new regulatory requirement, and here's how we've leveraged our system to help meet those goals, to help produce some improvements, some improved outcomes. We also have a number of RNs on staff, again, helping with that discussion, helping facilitate between the technology side of the discussion. I'm a geek, so sometimes nursing workflow doesn't always make sense to me. But the value of having Brian and having others on staff who are nurses are able to translate my geek speak into actionable, useful workflows for staff.
And my guess is that probably goes both ways too, because you've also got Brian being able to tell you, oh, by the way, Herb, here's what you need to know is happening on the patient floor as well, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Terrific. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit. So the reality is a lot of the projects that you guys do, Herb, you don't use a general contractor for, right? But every now and then, suddenly it makes sense that you've got a GC involved. Is that kind of what you found throughout your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen some projects where we really truly wish there would have been a GC involved. There just wasn't great communication internal to the organization, and the value, I think, in having a GC involved is streamlining that communication.
And let's talk a little bit now why that makes sense. I'm going to welcome my friend and co-worker Roger Daub to the program. Roger, thank you for being here with us today. And we've got a couple slides here to figure out, can I just deal with Mark and Herb, or do I need to get a GC involved? So how do you help people make that decision on whether or not it would make sense?
Well, Marcus, what's interesting is replacement of a nurse call system is a unique construction effort in itself versus new construction of a nurse call system. You're building a new building, you can integrate that into the project itself, but replacement has its own nuances that can be very challenging for a facility staff. Face it, today the facility staff is focused on maintenance, maintaining the facility. They're not necessarily skilled or knowledgeable in the actual construction activity of modifying an existing facility. And that's where you really need to take a look at your existing facility and ask some tough questions about whether or not you have the capability to, one, do the scope of work within house. For example, what if you have to modify a wall in order to accommodate a new box that's associated to the new nurse call system? Especially since the old nurse call system, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Herb, the old nurse call systems where the boxes on the wall may have been larger than the newer boxes today. So how do you make that modification?
And we've got some ugly pictures of that coming up here in a little bit. Herb, you were going to add something?
No, I would completely, totally agree. There is very often infrastructure change that comes along with a new nurse call system, and I think that's where the value comes in.
Where else does it come in, Roger?
It's interesting. It's quite often that an engineer of record may not have been hired for the purpose of designing the system. So you have a vendor that is providing you with input and guidance and system design associated to strictly the system itself. But then there's FGI and code compliance requirements relative to the facility structure. And that's where, not having an engineer of record, the construction manager can bridge that gap for your organization and bring that to close.
Lots of nuanced reasons, lots of nuanced questions. But when we were having discussion earlier this week, I asked you guys, was there kind of a binary, do we need a contractor, do we not need a contractor? And this was kind of the green light you told me. So what's another trigger, Roger, that says, oh, I should probably get a GC involved?
Sure. Certainly any time that you have a requirement to report this to DOH or obtain DOH approval because of the use of space may be changing, absolutely having the services of a construction manager would be most beneficial to your organization.
Awesome. And then let's talk about this final bullet point here of the value that a GC could bring to a project like this, if it makes sense.
Sure. As a construction manager, we pride ourselves on understanding scope, complexities, but most importantly, we are the owner's advocate. We speak on behalf of the owner in their absence and actually treat the project as though it is our facility. A construction manager, that's what you do. And being that front line for the owner is critical when you have to deal with multiple trades, multiple contractors, and sometimes an occupied building.
Outstanding. So you just, you mentioned it, it's occupied building, it's existing conditions, it's not greenfield work. So let's take a look here at some of the things that a GC would do on a project like this, Roger. And wow, what's that picture on the right? We got to talk about that first.
Well, that's an existing nurse call system. Everyone thinks that what's behind the wall, it's easy. It's just a bunch of wires. We can handle that until we take off the device, the existing device, and say, oh my goodness, that is not what we anticipated. I thought there would be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 wires. There's a couple more in there. And it's not uncommon that there's an assumption made during the survey process or the evaluation process of the system, of the existing system, that they understand what's behind the wall. But if you're talking, Mark mentioned it earlier, some of these systems are 15 to 20 years old. That's a lot of potential time for potential activity by various people that are associated to the facility.
So you get called in then to survey the existing conditions, and what are you trying to do?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is determine whether or not the existing facilities has a couple things. Number one, we want to validate where the fire and smoke walls are. We want to validate whether or not the new devices will fit within the existing openings, and if not, how do you make those modifications? But really, what's behind the wall? We need to evaluate whether or not if you're installing a replacement system that you have to chase down a wall to install that, what's behind that wall. A funny story, we had a situation where we thought we knew what was behind the wall because it looked like drywall. So we took a core device and we cored in there, and what was behind there was actually ceramic tile. And what was behind the ceramic tile was block. And then what was behind the block was the actual cavity. So had we just assumed that we could just simply run it down the wall, we would have been, during the course of the renovation, would have come to find out that the replacement may not have worked in that given situation.
Awesome. So now, once the surveying is done, though, and we've talked about this, Roger, you're not a project manager per se for Benchmark. You're actually a healthcare project manager, because again, construction inside a healthcare environment is a little bit different. So now that I've drilled into that wall, now that I've found these things, what happens now as it relates to construction?
Well, at the end of the day, patient and staff safety is number one, especially in a healthcare facility. You're dealing with infection control risk. You must be able to maintain space and prevent that activity that's going on within that space from negatively impacting the patients and staff around you. The use of partitions and barriers to safe off areas of work. And also, when you're doing that work, how do you mitigate the impacts from a noise standpoint, from a dust standpoint, and from a visual standpoint? How do you mitigate those impacts on the patients and the staff?
Well, and you said right there, staff. So if we take a look at the bullet point, everyone knows a GC manages the subcontractors and the trades, but it's a different world, and let's talk about what that coordination looks like in the healthcare environment.
Sure. In the healthcare environment, you're actually coordinating between not only subcontractors, trades, but the clinical staff. And in some cases, there may be a nurse call system that's shared between various floors and might have multiple nurse managers or unit managers associated to those different floors or different areas. And there's a coordination effort that must occur, and the best way to do that is to bring everybody into the room and make sure they understand scope of work, impacts, and what the schedule looks like. Having a construction manager do that is critical to the success of the project.
Outstanding. Well, thanks, Roger. Some great things to think about. And so, we've talked a lot about, okay, if you're going to be blowing out walls, it's a healthcare environment, that's very different. I love the binary idea that, if the Department of Health is involved, you're going to want a GC involved, right?
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
So that helps. So we're going to bring Mark back now, and Mark's going to talk about the RFP process. And Mark, you were telling us some funny stories about the RFP process. I don't want to make fun of anybody on the phone. I certainly don't want to make fun of any of your customers. But Mark, you mentioned to me that because people don't buy nurse call systems a lot, sometimes the RFPs that you get kind of look a little goofy or a little bit out there.
Yeah, once in a while we'll see something that might have been a boilerplate for something totally different. Okay, we put it out an RFP for a new electronic health record system, and we changed a couple words. We changed EHR to nurse call, and we're going to let that fly. Although nurse call system RFPs, especially with today's software applications and integrations. You have the hardware that's the UL 1069 Porsche's life safety grade equipment that does the basic hardened calling, patient to nurse communication. But the real big change in nurse call systems today is the software applications and integrations.
So obviously that needs to be a huge part of the RFP.
It should be.
So we've got a couple slides here that we're going to go through relatively rapidly. The first one's going to look at a high level what your goals are, which obviously should frame the RFP. Then we're going to look at, hey, how do you choose a product? How do you choose a partner? And due diligence. And then finally, here's some things that you don't want to do. So let's talk about a couple of the big things that you want to say. These are some of the big ones. So let's talk about these. What are the first things that you want to be putting in that RFP?
I think the first things that you want to be putting in that RFP are things that are specific to your organization, your initiatives, your goals, regulatory items that you need to address, patient safety goals, improved response times, happier, maybe you have a problem with staff turnover. Those things, nurse call can help those kind of things. So if you can identify them, put questions in your RFP to your vendor or supplier or system integrator, asking them how they address those things. And also ask those questions of the people who are using those systems when you go to those site visits or factory visits. I think that's key, and I think you want to make sure that you flesh out all the details on how these manufacturers and vendors approach this, even to the point where these are very large investments. So not only has the technology increased, so has the price tag. But many of our organizations have justified that price tag by leveraging the system to meet these goals and objectives. These goals and objectives have financial risk associated with them. And if your vendor can qualify, not just tell you that our system saves falls, you want them to provide a return on investment with clinical data that backs up those claims.
So two things before we move on to the next slide that I want to ask you about here. The first is, again, this whole point about analytics. It's kind of interesting to me because I'm guessing in the healthcare environment today, we have key performance indicators that we're trying to do as it relates to outcomes. But again, if I'm replacing a system that's 20 years old, I may not realize that a new system can actually provide those analytics that help me with those key performance indicators. So that's kind of what you're getting at with the analytics, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then the final one, which I think is really, really critical that you have here, is it's probably a great idea to understand that scorecard, what that criteria looks like. Because, what do you find that some organizations are pretty good at putting the RFP out, but then when it comes in, they're like, now what happens?
That's right. You want to put the RFP together such that when you get the results back, you are comparing apples with apples and not apples with oranges. And, I'd suggest that if you asked for 6 responses to your RFP and you narrowed that down to 3, please de-scope those people. It's just too easy to miss something, to hear those people out and ask why a price is higher than another, or, ask for more explanation on the responses to those questions. To do your due diligence and properly vet those respondents is going to pay off in a big way for you. Outstanding.
Now, for those on the phone who maybe have not upgraded their system in 20 years, honestly, this next slide, this is a little bit intimidating here, Mark. But how about you just talk to me about a couple of these and why they might or might not be important for a given organization? Well, the ROI claims, we touched on that a little bit, but if a person tells you that we're going to save falls in the average litigation, the average cost of an unlitigated fall is X number of dollars, they're going to want to see
clinical supporting documentation to that, an actual study, something from the Studer Group, something that was published in a respected journal. And I would push for that in order to validate those claims.
Let me ask you about the first bullet point, because I know I asked you about this earlier in the week, and I joked with you, are you being a real patriot here because American made, but we haven't even begun to discuss this. But your answer to me wasn't, well, it's not necessarily that it's even made in America, but let's talk about the service component. Is that how that comes up sometimes?
It does. Some products are maybe assembled in the USA, but support comes from maybe someplace where you have to call at 3 in the morning in order to get response. So you want to make sure that the product is made in the USA, is supported. Support comes from the USA, and that you have I think it's really important if you can get a product that has local distribution, people that are going to be your first tier for support, that if you need on-site support, you can get that right away 24/7.
Interesting bullet point here, remote diagnostics and support. I'm going to go to Herb. Herb, did remote diagnostics and support even exist 20 years ago?
It did not. It was wait a couple days and somebody drives on site, and just not a very effective approach. So we love the idea of being able to get in right away, diagnose problems, identify proactively before the resident or the patient notices that something's broken or before there's a safety risk. And we love the idea of getting those issues resolved.
So Mark, again, it goes back to exactly what you're saying. If I pull out the nurse call RFP that I used 15 years ago, big features like this that are now standard, I'm not even going to consider it. I'm not going to be able to compare vendors.
Exactly.
So obviously product becomes part of it, but then we also have to look into who our partners are. So, how about we do this as we look at these? And I love all these points that we have up here, Mark, but talk to me a little bit about what the landscape looks like. Who's in this business now? And, I didn't really give you guys a chance at the beginning to explain, who Sage is and who Peak is, but why don't you help me understand the landscape of partners that are out there and how, different people that we might be looking at.
Yeah, I don't want this to be too much of a commercial for Sage, but there's a variety of different vendors of nurse call and a variety of different distribution techniques. Our company is a systems integrator with a very wide and deep breadth of technology and expertise. So as I mentioned earlier, a call bell is pretty much a call bell. What really makes it shine is when you integrate it to the devices that make nurses more efficient and make communication across all areas of the hospital possible. And those are things like mobile devices. Those are things like bidirectional interface to your electronic health record. Those are things like real-time locating system. So some of the companies that may sell direct from a national basis may have key partnerships with certain vendors and may not be completely agnostic when it comes to that. So an advantage that we have and the product that we have is completely agnostic to any brand of mobile device or health record or RTLS system. And our company just doesn't do nurse call. We're experts in wireless LANs. We're experts in mobile telephony, in IT network, and everything that goes along with making this system work not only for clinical staff but from IT. It's extremely important when you're putting an RFP out to get collaboration from all these departments that nurse call is going to touch. Nurse call used to only touch, we call sometimes, the basement, okay? So the facilities, the clinical engineering, biomed, but never nursing in days past, never IT. There was no reason to talk to IT. But now all these people need to collaborate because to get the most out of the system, they're going to need the cooperation of all these folks.
So what I hear you saying is if you go back to that first slide where we talked about the goals of the RFP, if you really flesh those out well, from a partner standpoint, it really helps you decide the type of partner that you would want to be dealing with.
You're right.
Okay. Good. I get up every day just so once a day somebody tells me I'm right. So thank you, Mark. It took us till midway through the afternoon.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about, so now we know what to look for in a product, we know what to look for in a partner, okay, but let's talk about what that due diligence looks like, because we submit this RFP and it's 5-6 pages. But now exactly, what does that due diligence process look like? So take us through that, Mark.
Yeah, well, this is a repeat on some of the items that I've already mentioned, but please, if possible, form a committee, determine what your needs are, and do that across all the different departments in the hospital because it can touch everybody. People don't realize that a nurse call system can improve bed turnover. And a lot of people won't know that, but there are a lot of benefits we can provide to environmental services with button presses and mobile device messaging to streamline the existing workflow. You want a system that is extremely configurable, should I say, because we don't push a workflow on someone. We work with your workflow and enhance that workflow. That's why people like Herb, who's a Lean Six Sigma consultant, and Brian and our other RN clinical liaisons are key to educating these folks on what the system can do and matching those features up to what the requirements are to meet their goals. I've seen a lot of RFPs over 30 years, and like you said, some are at no fault of the folks who are putting them together. They weren't there 20 years ago when they bought a nurse call system before, and nurse call systems don't look anything like they used to. So I believe that the RFP should be as detailed as possible. If you can get drawings done by your consulting engineer or construction manager, it puts everybody on the same page. You want apples and apples because sometimes salespeople take a lot of liberties in their analysis and their interpretation of what might not be a completely thorough specification. So use consulting engineers, use construction managers to pull all this together so that you are looking at apples and apples.
And clearly, Mark, you mentioned some of those pitfalls, and I think you actually it might even be on here is the different pitfalls we have. But you took us through how to do it correctly. Now, if we don't listen to you, these are some of the pitfalls that we see sometimes, right? So let's all feel real sad here for a moment, but take us through some of the things that as it relates to nurse call.
Sure. Without a committee, you may just be relying on one person. That person's it's a potential that person's objectives may not be in alignment with the hospital's objectives as a whole. If it's an IT person, that they might have a slant towards something that is more IT savvy, and that might not necessarily be something that the director of nursing finds helpful for that system.
Let me ask you about that second bullet point there, because one of the things that we really haven't addressed, and it's not really, we're not going to talk a whole lot today about cost, but one of the things that we talked about was there are different ways that people price this stuff. So let's talk about bullet point number 2 there.
Yeah, bullet point 2, total cost of ownership, is based on your initial purchase and whatever you're paying all the parties involved to get that first installation put in. You're going to want to know what the recurring costs are going to be. What are my options for service and maintenance? Am I going to be forced to buy an insurance policy type break fix policy, whether my system breaks or not? Can I choose to use time and materials for repairs on that? How are my staff going to be trained 2 years from now when I have turnover? Does your service agreements include professional services from instructor-led registered nurses and so forth? What are my software licenses costs going to look like?
The software license costs. Herb, I want to bring you back on that last point there because poor Brian, who was supposed to join us, and he's somewhere off in the internet world today. But Brian talked about training in our rehearsal earlier this week, and how through nursing staff turnover or training, those last 2 bullet points are a critical issue. Herb, can you talk a little bit about Brian shared with us how it works in a great world, in a perfect world, and how it might work in the real world?
Yeah, so in a perfect world, we love the idea of being in front of the customer. We love the idea of hands-on training. We love the idea of at-the-elbow support when a system goes live. And we love the idea of ongoing education for staff. Real world, there's a lot of turnover in healthcare environments. So as Mark mentioned, a year or 2 or 3 down the road, you may not have the same set of staff. One of the things that we can do to improve that education and that retention is to provide online education for staff, e-learning modules. As you onboard new staff, you can continue to deliver that same education that the original staff got.
Outstanding. So that's what it looks like to put together an RFP for the nurse call itself here. On our final slide, Roger, what I do next? I just pull out the phone book and hire any GC I want, or there's some certain GC considerations that I should look at in the context of this as well?
Well, you know, many of our clients we've had a relationship with for a long time. However, there might be some callers or participants on the event today that may not have established relationships with GCs, and they would find themselves having to look for one. And one of the things you should consider right up front is, number one, does the GC have experience in dealing with nurse call systems, and do they have the capacity and experience to manage the complexities associated to nurse calls? And the complexities I talk about are the things like, can they coordinate the electrical activity versus the low voltage activity? You know, the 120 volt versus the low voltage side. Can they coordinate the activities associated to the IT department and the IT integration? And, you know, the bottom line, are they familiar with their facility, or do they have the ability to get familiar with their facility prior to the start of the project? Will they work with your facility staff to conduct that pre-discovery and that discovery exercise, and going in and evaluating your existing facility to determine wall composition and floor composition and penetration compositions, those type of things? And most importantly, can they get the trades that you need to support the activity? You know, we talked about electrical, we talked about installing wires, but you know, you're going to disturb a wall. You may have to patch that wall, you may have to paint that wall, you may have to put a new covering on that wall. That takes some specialty trades to do that work, and does your construction manager or GC have those relationships to be able to bring those resources to bear?
It would seem to me that it takes the specialized skill, but that first bullet point that you talk about, the experience with occupied space, you know, you would want an electrician who is also familiar with the occupied space, correct?
Absolutely. You know, especially in, you know, the senior living facilities of today, and obviously healthcare facilities of today, they're traditionally occupied. They're not going to vacate the space in order for you to do your work. And you want to have not only a GC or a construction manager has that experience, but the trade partners understand how to work, act, talk, walk around an occupied facility.
Outstanding. Well, that's great feedback, Roger. Really do appreciate it. Mark gave us a million things to think about. And of course, Herb told us, you know, how this all comes together. Brian, of course, was here with us in spirit. Now, at this point, we've got about 10 minutes left for Q&A, and I've got a couple questions that have come in, so I'm going to bring everyone back to the panel now. First question that I have actually is for Herb, and it has to do with one of the things Mark said. This is a question related to that Six Sigma process. You know, have you found yourself, or do you ever find yourself in a situation where you actually do suggest different workflows, or do you kind of try to draw the line in terms of, I'm not here to fix workflow, I'm here to integrate this technology with an existing workflow?
No, we absolutely look for the opportunity to improve workflow. We'd like to start the discussion with best practices. We've had the opportunity to do this with other organizations. We've got data to back up our approaches, and we've got the flexibility to tailor workflow to each organization. That kind of also speaks to the idea of optimization with your new solution. It's not just buy it, turn it on, and walk away. We continue to leverage it. We continue to optimize it over time.
Outstanding. We got a question came in online from Alyssa. Alyssa's asking about the analytics. And, you know, this just kind of blows my mind. It's one of those things that there were no analytics to nurse call 20 years ago. But analytics are interesting because the question becomes, how do you consume that information? So let's talk about this. Does it look like a real-time dashboard? Does it look like a monthly report? Does it look like custom reports, however I want? You know, what's kind of state of the art these days?
So state of the art is customized, tailored to your requirements for your organization. The ability to have those reports on the fly whenever you need them. Dashboards are becoming more and more common, and I think more and more relevant. So it can be a combination, but generally you want data immediately so that you can act on that data immediately.
Outstanding. Question as it relates to a GC, Roger. It seems like, broadly speaking, lots of times in construction you've got a big project that you do, but it would seem to me that in nurse call what you're talking about is several small projects that are taking place, throughout the facility. So, do you find in cases, is it ever cost prohibitive to involve a GC, or is it really, if I hit those other things that we discussed earlier, I'm going to want a GC involved? I guess what I'm getting at is it seems perhaps like a small job for a GC.
It can be a small job for a GC, but not for a specialized healthcare GC. There will be cases where nurse call replacement may not warrant a construction manager or general contractor, because you either A, have the facility staff in-house that can support it, or project management staff in-house that needs to support it, or you might just be doing one single unit. However, in a situation where you're dealing with multiple units and you're actually doing work in multiple areas of the hospital or the facility at the same time on multiple floors in various units, some requiring ICRA, some not requiring infection control. That's where the complexities associated to an occupied space would warrant the use of the GC. So excellent question.
Wonderful, thank you. Mark, I got one final question from you, and then I would invite any additional questions that people want to submit via the chat room. That's absolutely fine. But Mark, we've got somebody on the call who is absolutely amazed that nurse call can help with quicker bed turnover. So first I want you to tell me how that happens, but then I'm going to ask if there's any other secondary benefits of nurse call that we may not consider.
Herb looks so excited about this. I think he wants to chime in too. I'll do a basic overview of what I've seen customers do, and then let Herb expand on that. So, some of the processes that we recommend are initiated by a simple button press. Code blue. You don't have to think about that. You just push a button. So our nurse call systems allow for customization of many different types of event initiations, and some of those can be related to bed turnover. So if a room is vacated, we can push a button that can automatically and silently notify an environmental services person, who, when they arrive, can push a button and indicate that the room is now in cleaning, and when they're done, push a room is now ready for another patient, and that information can be displayed right down at the manager, the bed czar, the environmental services director, so that they can board another patient in that room. And much of this now can be done because nurse call systems aren't just bells and lights anymore. This can be automated through the use of RTLS systems and integrations to third-party bed management software that streamlines the whole process, where maybe a button press isn't even needed any longer.
That's fascinating. So what you're really saying is something that previously was used to alert a nurse can now almost be a status of this is where this room is.
Correct. There's a fundamental transition from patient to staff communication to now nurse call solutions can offer staff-to-staff communication. Essentially, we have the ability to bring automation and consistency and visibility to existing processes.
Outstanding. Well, it looks like we've got all the questions that we want to get. I want to thank everyone that joined us here today. Sorry we did not get to hear from Brian. Brian and Herb can be reached at peakocg.com. They work nationwide. Mark Lizambre works with Sage Techs, and Sage is essentially very similar footprint of Benchmark, right? Eastern half of the U.S. or eastern half of Pennsylvania. Central eastern part of Pennsylvania, down into Maryland a little bit. Roger Daub, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Marcus Grimm with Benchmark Construction. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and please have a wonderful rest of your day.